All right, do you mind if I tell you what you're doing? Since I just hit record. We're throwing off the hump. I put like 4 or 5 pounds down and just pressed the clay to the wheel head so that it wouldn't move. And now I'm using this rigid part of the side of my hand, really my bone structure, to clasp in just the top clay that can fit into the palm of my hand. And that compression in from the sides from those fingers replaces the compression you would get on the wheel head surface. The other thing is you can see that it starts to like mushroom a little bit. Maybe you can see that shadow line. And so that means I'm like cupping underneath it so that as I press down and in right inside my palm, that's the best I can do to replace the 3 directional pressures that I usually talk to you about on the wheel: the side, the top, and the diagonal, right? So side, top, diagonal. You can cone up and cone down with this. So I'm gonna cone up and really compress the core of that clay, and then hooking on the side just a little bit, press back down. Okay, so a little tall, skinny jar. And now you just throw it like a pot. So the knob on top is centered, but nothing below is present. Now with my 2 thumbs, and I really need to support on the outside so that it doesn't widen too much, but I'm just starting from the bottom and like a normal cylinder, pulling parallel to the surface of the wheel head, and now out to that corner, and then just compressing back and forth. So my left hand is pressing in and my right hand is pressing down, making that flat. And then I'm ready to throw the side like a normal cylinder. So the bottom's already a little bit thin, so I'm gonna ease up my pressure. Now I'm kind of in that bulge, and I'm thinning out the bulge and compressing the rim. That opening and pulling up the initial wall is where you might get it a little bit off center. So recentering the rim at the very first pull up is important. And then back down to the bottom. So you want to leave that top rim kind of thick if it's going to be a jar. So I've pulled up, let me get a little bit of clay off my hands. Enough to touch the outside of my computer. So when you look inside of it, you see that rim looks kind of thick. The wall right below that is half that thickness. And so now I'm gonna detail the top a little bit so it accepts the rim of so it accepts the edge of the lid. So just throwing from the bottom one more time, making sure the 90-degree corner is in there. Getting up through the wall. And now it's like I have a little shelf on the top. I'm flattening it off and kind of centering it and pulling off any extra slough of clay. And then there's a couple ways to do this. I'm gonna take the side of my finger where my nail is, and you know how we talk about making that 90-degree corner? Like I'm pushing into the corner of the pot with my fingernail to really make it so it's not slopey. I'm gonna use that same part of my hand, or I can also use like a tool. I have a tool at home that has a sharper corner. Some people will, this one has a little bit soft rounded edges, so I'm gonna have to go in and kind of clean it up, but I have one at home that's just a straight stick and it ends with a really sharp 90-degree corner. So I would prefer to use that. I might actually use the edge of the ruler in that way. So I like that shape better, that section. So what I'm gonna do is support underneath the rim. If I could, I just had an idea how you might be able to see it better. There you go. So I'm going to support underneath, and then I'm going to use the edge of this tool to split that surface. So the right side of it, I'm going to draw the line. That's actually section below, right? But the side that's on the inside, once I press this tool, it's going to drop it down. And it trims off a little bit, but if you support underneath it, that surface will move lower, and then you have like a little gallery. And there's a little bit of extra thickness right below the rim. So I'm using this stick to kind of help me make it a little bit taller with that thickness. But I've already established what my lid will sit in. So I know that I can always trim down if it's too big, but at least I won't have too little. Because if you have too little, you can't make this much dimension out of it. If you don't leave enough clay at the beginning, it'll definitely collapse. Any questions about that part before I show you how to measure?
I have a question more about throwing off the hump. Like you just put your palm around it and that's how you determined it, but you can't really measure the clay you're going to be using if you do that. Right?
I guess, no, that does come with experience to know how much clay to put off in your hand. If it's over 1 pound, if it's over the dimension of your hand, then I wonder why you're throwing on the hump. So I'm just going to use the calipers, and because I'm on the hump, like I might make 3 or 4 of these before I actually make the lids. So that's 2 7/16, and it's super important to be exact, and it's super important to measure now. And so I would cut this off. Do I need a wire tool? Set it off to the side and then write down that measurement. All right, and then I'm going to throw one more time off the hump and then make the lid with that one. What did I say? 2 7/16, right? 2 7/16. So I'm going to use the calipers in the other dimension. This is why I write it down, because you don't keep the calipers in the same orientation. You use them wide to measure around the object instead of inside the object now. 2 7/16. All right. It's looking pretty good over there. You're almost ready to open it. Look at that. That, I think your clay was making a difference, huh?
Yeah.
Looking good. I think you should open it. So gently run your fingers along the side. Excuse me while I take you off the water. Gently, yeah, put your fingers on the inside. Yet your hands are kind of resting on the outside, and you're dropping your thumbs in. No, gently, softly touching the outside, because your thumbs are doing all the work. So you're just trying to stay in contact with what is already centered. All right, excuse me for that little pause. We are pulling together, oh, we need barely anything for this lid, but I'm gonna get a little bit of this stuff up off the wheel. Not worried about it being centered, but just closer to taller, so it's not a plate anymore. And then pressing down on the diagonal because it was about to get a well, and then coning back up. Still has a little bit of a well, so before I really choose what I want for the lid, because I need almost no clay at all, get back, push it back down, and then cone back up. So you can see each time I'm coning up a little bit smaller piece. So I've kind of worked through the well by pressing down, and then I'm just coning up that tiny little amount since then. And I like to go ahead and start checking. Unfortunately, these calipers are loose, which is why we love the ruler. Okay, so you can see, I don't need that much more clay, right? Tiny little ball for that tiny little lid. I'm gonna measure it with my finger, so I don't have to keep looking. From the tip of my finger, oh, until here, that's a good indicator. I can do that. Yes, yes, yes. So I'm giving myself a little visual indicator on my hand. Then that way I don't have to do so much work with the caliper. All right, so now let's see. We want a lid. Do you want it to be, Adam, do you want it to be flat topped, or do you want it to be like a little bowl, like it has a little dome on top?
I was hoping for a little dimple, like a bowl.
Little bowl, okay, great. Let's make a little bowl. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start pressing down here to make this separation taller. And that's what I'm gonna trim the handle out of. So at some point, you're gonna leave solid clay on the bottom of it to be the knob. How you doing over there? Did it get off a little bit? Okay. I think you need to kind of wrap your hands over the top and kind of see if you can steady that. And then mostly I don't want you to focus on it. Like if you look at my pots, they're not all totally like perfect. What we do is we don't focus on it. We move it up to the rim and we trim it off. Yeah. So try and steady it with your hands and then just go for it anyway. So back to this, we are heightening this little guy to make the knob. So he's taller, like however high that little, so I'm thinking about like, what's that knob gonna look like? And now I'm cutting in for the bowl. So the knob is huge, but I'd rather have too much to support the bowl and trim off that stuff later. So teeny tiny little bowl. It's only as tall as 2 fingers. And if we were to look at how wide it needs to be, barely a bowl. But I might like to have, I'm going to go ahead and make the part that kind of sticks down into the hole itself so it locks, just because that's really the most sophisticated lid. So I'm just going to press down in, and you can kind of see where I'm pressing in what I think is going to be like the floor of the bowl, basically. And now I'm throwing a teeny tiny bowl with a giant rim. And it didn't need to be that big, right? I'm already at 2. Yeah, and 5/8. I need like almost no more width. Tiny little guy. So I'm gonna throw him just a little bit wider so I can trim down. And now I'm gonna come in on this side and see I have this extra thick rim. So again, this rim is twice as thick as it literally what's happening right below it. So I'm gonna try and move some of that clay in, a little off center there. Some of that clay in, and so now it has a collar. So instead of digging down this time, I dug in from the side and lifted a tiny cylinder up from it. Just kind of clean it off a little bit. All right, let's check that overall width can be a little bit wider, which is good. Just give it a little bit more shape. Coming up to that corner, then flattening off where it's actually gonna touch the gallery part, and then this needs to be the flange part that sticks down into it. So you can see I need a fair amount of clay on the rim to kind of make all that stuff happen. All right, let's check some dimensions. All right, you got the floor open, Sydney?
Yeah.
Okay, guys, so I'm like right on it. I feel pretty good about that. I'm just gonna clean it up a little bit with the sponge. Take off some of that slurry. You would want to measure this interior diameter as well, like this guy. So I'm gonna make sure he fits down inside of there. I'm gonna get my 90-degree guy out. I think the problem is he's just a little bit slopey. All right. And then probably needs a little bit of love right there on that. And then this is his knob. Now that he's pretty much ready, I'm just gonna make this, I'm just kind of pushing the clay down a little bit just so it's a little bit thinner. Like less clay that I have to trim off. And then you can like draw a line if that's helpful for you to like see where to put your wire tool. Some people use these wire tools that only have handles like on one side, and then as the string wraps around it, it like coils and cuts it. But you just want to be, I usually try and kind of be careful about cutting it level. And then let's see if he fits. So when you're ready to trim him, it's a little bit wide. He's pretty thick. You would set him inside of that, and you would put this on the wheel, and then you would trim the lid sitting inside the jar. But so I just split, so a thick rim, I split it and gave it a different shape.
So cute. Love it.
Yeah, the handle will look really, it'll be like a little round ball by the time I'm done with it. But does that give you a start with what it might look like to throw on the hump? Okay, so it's basically, yeah, picking, you could kind of see the difference. When I had my whole hand, I made a small mug. When I had half a hand, I made a tiny bowl. That's how you know how much clay to center. Anything else?
Years of experience.
Yeah, and even then, they're not always the same. I just don't let it bother me.
So would you recommend maybe doing what you did there and trying to throw off the hump like a bunch of mini vessels just to practice with lids?
Yeah, the hardest part about it is just compressing the bottom so that they don't split, so they don't have the compression fracture. That's the only thing you have to worry about.
And then one last question. In terms of like they'd be fired separately, but drying, would you like how do you make
I dry them together, and I best fire them together. Glaze fire them, you can fire if it's a really tight fit. I would actually fire them together with no glaze between them. If it's a really loose fit, then I glaze both sides, and the glaze actually takes up some of that loose fit when they go back together.
Okay, so you do fire them together.
If it's a tight fit, yes, because they can warp very easily. And that's a simple lid. Lids get very complicated. So they warp really easily. That way, if you fire them together, then they warp the same.
So you should let them rest together as well, like get leather hard together.
Yeah, is like these, I wouldn't normally put the lid on right away, like making it really sticky, it'll stick together, but yeah, dry together after they're trimmed for sure. And you have to I tried to measure really carefully when it's on the hump and not later, because if you trim one while it's like 30% dry and the next one while it's 40% dry, they're shrunk different and they won't measure up. The only time that they measure precisely is wet off the wheel and bone dry. Those are the only times that you can alter them and expect them to actually be the right proportions to each other. All right, good.